Loading hot takes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome into TwinTakes Fantasy Football, and for my first ever analysis video on this channel, I'm going to talk about something that I think is crucial to developing a winning strategy for the upcoming fantasy season, and that is nailing the top 4 picks. Not only do these top 4 picks determine what strategy you're going to be used for the rest of the draft and building your team, but they also determine the core of your team that scores the bulk of your points, and missing out on any one of these players is a huge detriment to your team. So I've gone ahead and simulated an auto draft just to kind of give us an average ADP of the players going in the first 4 rounds, and we'll use that to talk about where you should certain players to avoid within these 4 rounds to make sure you have a really solid core that you can build around. Also, as a fun extra, I've gone ahead and not auto drafted the first pick. I know one of the main debates of the season is who's the number 1 overall, CMC or Jonathan Taylor. In my personal opinion, it should be CMC. No analysis, I'm just giving you my opinion. But with that being said, let's get into the first landmine. The first landmine to avoid in your draft in the first 4 rounds is Tyreek Hill. Now, I understand it's been hard. He's been a top 5 wide receiver in many of the past years, but let me give you some examples about why this is going to be the year that all changes. First off, this is his age 28 season, and that is the year that historically most wide receivers fall off a cliff, and I'm the type of person that bets on history, not hoping for an outlier. Secondly, Tyreek was really known as a super inconsistent wide receiver up until the 2020 season. Let me just provide some stats to back that up. We're going to talk about how many bad games he's had his entire career. And by a bad game, I'm talking about single digits and a half PPR. So 2016, 9 out of 16 games, over half were single digit bad games. In 2017, 7 out of 15 games were bad. In 2018, 8 out of 16 games were bad. That's exactly half. In 2019, that was 7 out of 12 games played were bad games. So you can see that there's tremendous inconsistency. And that was such a huge thing that was talked about even up in the draft process for 2020. And then finally he had his breakout season. That was when Patrick Mahomes really establishes himself as an elite quarterback, and he only had 3 bad games that one year, and it really changed the narrative. But even then, I don't think it's going to change who Tyreek Hill is as a player, because as we look in 2021, 10 out of the 17 games that he played were bad games, were single digit games. And I think that this inconsistency is only going to be amplified with a new quarterback that does not have a connection with. Speaking of the new situation that Tyreek is in, receivers historically struggle with a running QB, and we've seen that Tua is more inclined to run and scramble rather than extend the play like Patrick Mahomes did and fire deep bombs to Tyreek Hill, which is where a lot of his fantasy points came from. Speaking of deep bombs, Tua's arm strength is a massive concern, and I'm one of the people that, yes, I understand that Tyreek has ungodly speed that we've never seen before in the NFL. He really did a lot of work with catching screens. He took handoffs. He really did a lot of work after the catch. But at least half of his production in the past few years has come from the deep ball. And that's with extending plays. And I don't think that Tua is going to be able to supply Tyreek with the same deep balls that Mahomes used to give him to. And now I'm just going to say that this is the year that we find out, did Tyreek make Patrick Mahomes, or did Patrick Mahomes make Tyreek? And from all the analysis I've watched, I'm really going to bet on that Mahomes really amplified Tyreek Hill's game. As we go back, he was a super inconsistent quarterback up until super inconsistent wide receiver up until Mahomes became his quarterback and changed the entire narrative around what Tyreek could be as a wide receiver. So I'm betting on Mahomes rather than Tyreek, and I think that this inconsistency that we've described here with Tyreek is going to lose you more weeks than it will win you weeks. So that's why I'm avoiding Tyreek Hill at all costs. In fact, I would even go on a ledge and say I would draft Jalen Waddle over Tyreek Hill as it stands right now. Moving on to number 2, the second fantasy landmine I'm talking about in the first 4 rounds. It's kind of cheeky, but it's any tight end drafted in this round, and I'll explain why. And this refers to the top 5 tight ends in Waller, Kittle, Pitts, Andrews, and Kelsey. I just think there's more value at top end wide receiver and running back. When you think of an amazing game for a tight end, you're like, wow, 25 points. That's going to be tight end 1 on the week. That's going to be insane. But what about wide receiver and running back? When you talk about amazing games for them, it's like 35, 40 points. Those are running back 1 and wide receiver 1 games. So there's just a higher ceiling for wide receivers and running backs at the top end talent level. Also, I think positional value at the tight end is a myth. Now people are like, oh, well, there's a lot bigger delta in points between the tight end 1 and the tight end 10 than the running back 1 and the running back 10. So I would much rather have the tight end 1 and running back 10 than the tight end 10 and running back 1. Well, yes, when you put it like that, it makes sense, but you're not factoring in ADP. And what do you mean by that? Well, what I mean is that you're drafting the running back 10 in the second round. You're drafting the tight end 10 in the 11th, 12th round, or sometimes the tight end 10 doesn't even go drafted. So a more accurate comparison would be, would you rather have the tight end 1 and the running back 30 at the end of the draft, or would you rather have like a running back 5 and the tight end 10? And in that case, I'm taking the running back 5 and tight end 10 every single time. So, also playing off that, there's plenty of tight end depth at the end of the draft, as we've seen leagues increase core skill positions, player spots. The ADP of wide receivers and running backs gets higher and higher and higher, but that just hasn't caught up with tight ends. You can still get the tight end 10, tight end 6, 7, 8 at the end of the draft. You can really load up on core skill position players at the top end of the draft, and then just stream tight ends and still get a top 10 finish every single week. So there's so much depth at tight end, and because you're only really forced to play one per week, there's not really a need to waste a high value pick on a tight end. I will give you a reason specifically for each one of these tight ends and why not to draft them. Kelsey, age. He's going to be 32 years old, and that's almost ancient for the NFL. Also, I think that Andy Reid, with the influx of new talent at wide receiver and trying to prove some of these guys, especially the rookie and Sky Moore, he's going to scheme a lot of plays for the wide receivers, taking targets and opportunities away from Travis Kelce. Kittle, he's been pretty injury prone in the past, plus we just don't know what Trey Lance is. I'm not super confident on Trey Lance, so a lot of risk taking Kittle that high. Waller, Adams just came there. It's going to be huge sponge for opportunities and targets, given his proclivity and relationship with Derek Carr. So I think it's going to take a lot of opportunity away from Waller that he's had in the past. Plus, he's sitting out training camp with an injury currently. Pitts just hasn't done it. I understand that the athleticism there and the freaky talent is there, but he's just never done it. Plus, Marcus Mariota is his quarterback, and Atlanta is currently on schedule to be like the 31st ranked offense. It's really hard for me to draft offensive pieces in the worst offense in the top 4 rounds. Finally, Andrews. Andrews is the one that I can't really put a massive knock on him. The only thing I can say is that it's a run scheme there in Baltimore, and Lamar has been injury prone the past couple years, so that's going to be the issue with Mark Andrews. But if you are the type of person that doesn't like to stream tight ends, that doesn't want to put too much effort into fantasy, Mark Andrews would be the one tight end that I could be okay with taking in the early rounds. All right, moving on to landmine number 3, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this one because he's one of the fantasy darlings of this year, and it's wide receiver T. Higgins. Okay, after all the booze has subsided, let me tell you why I'm not high on T. Higgins at his current ADP. In this current draft, he's the wide receiver 12 off the board, and I can't just bring myself to draft a wide receiver 2 in the top 15 wide receivers or in the first 4 rounds. I would rather take someone who's taking the majority of opportunity, as well as the definitive wide receiver 1 position. You have Michael Pittman, Jalen Waddle, and Brandon Cooks, Marquise Brown, a lot of guys who are the definitive tight end or wide receiver 1 at their position that I think should be taken over at wide receiver 2. And T. Higgins is going to remain the wide receiver 2 unless something drastic happens to Jamar Chase, and I just don't think that's going to happen. I love Jamar Chase, and he is the bona fide wide receiver 1 there in Cincy for as long as he wants to be, really. Secondly, and hang with me, I believe this season there's going to be a lot of regression in Cincinnati. That's because this will be Burrow's sophomore slump. But it's his 3rd year in the NFL. Yes, I get that. But his first year was cut short by an ACL injury. And then last year, in his true sophomore year, he really wasn't allowed to play to his full capacity. Joe Burrow wasn't for the first half of the year. He was really protected by Joe Mixon, by the offensive line, and by the scheme of the coach there and Zach Taylor. So truly, we've only really seen Joe Burrow at his full capacity for the first half of his freshman year and the second half of his sophomore year. Put that together, you get 1 year. This is going to be his second full year in the NFL by my weird calculations, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a slump, a little bit of regression. Also, let's look at past production. In 2020, T. Higgins had no games over 60 points, 16 points. And we talked about we're looking for guys that have massive upside, ceilings of, over 30 points. And in 2020, his rookie season had 0 games over 16 points. That's not something that I want in one of my top 4 picks. In 2021, he only had 3 games over 16 points. Only 3. That's kind of ridiculous. And half of those games, he ended up actually in single digits. That could be a real landmine if that's what you're building your core around. And in one of those 3 games, it was against a Ravens defense where he scored 40 points in and of himself, which really padded his stats a lot. So that is an outlier game that I think should be omitted from his projections and stats when you're taking into how successful T. Higgins was last year. And also that Ravens defense was an outlier. Ravens were the most injured team in the past 2 decades. It's actually ludicrous. They lost Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Chuck Clark, maybe. They just lost so much people on that defense that it was absolutely decimated. And so that's something that's never going to happen again. Ravens are back to full strength. And that 40-point game is truly, truly an outlier. And also, currently, he's in training camp with a shoulder injury. Come on, guys. I'm not going to take any risks on injured players coming in my top 4 picks. So hopefully I've tried to explain why T. Higgins is not someone that I'm targeting even in the 4th, 5th, or 6th rounds. So avoid him at all costs. Take a wide receiver that is going to be the true bona fide number 1 in their offense. That is my only advice. All right, moving on to fantasy landmine number 4. We'll get some more hate here too. It's Javonte Williams. And listen, I get it. There's been news about a Melvin Gordon foot injury, but let's calm down. It's not going to be long term. He's going to be fine. He'll be back in the offense in no time. And that's the big thing about Javonte Williams is he's going to be handicapped by Melvin Gordon. He's going to be schemed into the offense. He's going to take a lot of plays away from Javonte Williams. I get that there was a report out of camp that said it was going to be 70-30 with Javonte. But if you listen to the beat writers and kind of get away from the hype, it has been 50-50 splits in training camp and in the preseason as well. So we can't really see this true number 1 running back workhorse work rate from Javonte Williams. Not only is it crowded in the running back room with Melvin Gordon, but also it's this crowded skill position player room. And even with Tim Patrick going down to injury, you still have Jerry Jeudy, you still have Cortland Sutton, you still have KJ Hamler. Kendall Hinton even has been pretty banging in the preseason. And then you have Greg Dulcich, not to mention Albert Okwuegbunam as tight end. So it's just so many mouths to feed, and there's only a limited pie that you can split up between them. Thirdly, let's talk about the person throwing them the ball, Russell Wilson. I don't think the regression at the end that we saw at the end of last year was an outlier. I think he truly is coming to the end of his career. I mean, there's reports out of training camp that he's put on a lot of weight. I know a lot of people saying, oh, it was the hand injury, he's going to be back to full strength. I don't. I think what we saw at the end of last year with Russ is what we're going to see going forward with his play into perpetuity. And I think a quarterback that can't run an facilitated offense is going to bring the whole offensive production down as a whole. I'm just not in on Russell Wilson right now after what we saw last year. And I think that him and everything he brings to the offense is going to be a huge detriment to Javonte Williams. Also, I'm looking at this this division as a whole. It's a really tough AFC West, and there's going to be so many great quarterbacks. This is like an insanely quarterback-heavy division. They have insane amount of wide receivers: Mike Williams, Devontae Adams, Juju, Sky Moore, Keenan Allen. I mean, there's going to be so many points put up in these divisions games that it's going to lead to a pass-dominant offense, and I think that's going to be schemed away from Javonte Williams. I know he can work as a pass catcher, but with the pass-catching weapons of Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy and this arms race in the AFC West, it's going to be a pass-dominant offense and take away opportunities from Javonte Williams. And I understand that with one injury and with the right opportunity, he could be a top 5 running back, but there's a lot of other running backs in that area that I like a lot more, like Saquon Barkley and Aaron Jones. I know this is a huge stretch, I like Travis Etienne more than Javonte Williams right now, and I'd rather take a wide receiver in the second round where Javonte's currently going and wait and snag Etienne a round or 2 later. Lastly, and I did have a hard time making up my mind on this one, so there's the last fantasy lamb I'm talking about today is high-risk running backs, and that's Antonio Gibson and David Montgomery. So they're literally the same for me. If you put them side by side, I couldn't tell you which one is which because they're both in pretty horrific situations. Let's start with Gibson. He's been injury prone. We've seen it in the past couple seasons where he can't stay on the field for a full season, and he's been limited in games with shin and knee injuries, which is really concerning for a running back. He is in a committee. It's come out that Ron Rivera does want to utilize J.D. McKissic more. They went back and signed J.D. McKissic. They drafted Brian Robinson, who's going to be a goal line and third down back. And that's really going to vulture a ton of opportunity and touches for Antonio Gibson. Also, we talked about Russ bringing down the offense in Denver. Well, Carson Wentz is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and I know that's my opinion, but I loathe Carson Wentz, and I think he's going to completely bring down the entire offense, and that's going to be pretty bad for Antonio Gibson when the offense is just completely decimated as a whole. And finally, this is the Commanders we're talking about. This is one of the most incompetent organizations in all of sport, across baseball, hockey, basketball, soccer even. So I'm really not in on the Commanders offense. I'm staying away from them at all. Between Dan Snyder and Carson Wentz, does not strike me with a lot of confidence. And now we'll just run through the same list with Montgomery, who is also a huge injury risk. Dave Montgomery is also a huge injury risk. Also, we have Khalil Herbert in, who proved himself as a dominant running back. And then also there's a new regime that has no loyalty to David Montgomery. As we've seen, he's taken snaps with the special teams. I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't want my running back ones taking snaps with the special teams. That shows a complete lack of loyalty by the new regime. And there's been a lot of talk about Khalil Herbert being way more involved in the offense. I think players like Montgomery, they have this one amazing season or this one stellar moment, and it really carries them in fantasy for a long time. And that was the 2020 championship run when Tyreek Cohen got injured, and they had this really easy schedule down the stretch, and he was putting up, I think it was like 20 plus weeks for 4 weeks straight at the very end of the season into the fantasy, and led a lot of people to the championships, and people are remembering that and continuing to draft him high based on that one season 2 years ago. But we certainly saw a lot of regression in 2021. There were 7 single-digit games in 21, and that's about half the games he even played. And I think that regression is only going to continue into the 2022 season. So I'm definitely avoiding those running backs at all costs. I would rather play Chase Edmonds, who you can get 2 to 3 rounds later, over and either Gibson or Montgomery. So I'm a huge fan of the wide receivers in this range. I love all the wide receivers you can get here. Drake London's huge on my board. I think the opportunity's going to be great. Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore are all guys I'd rather take shots on a wide receiver. And then if you need a running back, circle back around and take Chase Edmonds later. I do want to give one honorable mention here, and that's Alvin Kamara. Not that he's not a bad player, but he's going to get suspended. I know there's been talk about it, appealing the suspension. It's going to be pushed back to next year. I think he's going to miss a significant chunk of the game, and that's really no further analysis needed. Don't draft a player who's going to miss half the season on suspension. So there's Alvin Kamara's hot take for you. And these are fantasy laments I want you to avoid, especially in the first 4 rounds. This is not to mention that if they fall into the 5th, 6th, 7th round, if your team or team members and league members are catching on and not buying into these players as well, and they fall, take them in the 5th round, take them in the 6th round, take them well below their ADP. I'm just saying these are not the core 4 players you should build around. So hopefully it's given you some insight into where I think you should be really focusing your efforts or avoiding your efforts when you're building your core, your fantasy football team. And good luck this season.